Andrew, welcome back to the podcast.
Nice to be back. Thanks for having me again.
Okay, let's first start with like who you are, just so that everybody who's listening has a base idea of what this is about.
Yeah, so my name is Andrew Gibbons, and I'm a Feldenkrais teacher, which means I'm a teacher that helps people with both the way that they move, and also a big part of it is how people use their attention in the way that they move. So in some respects, the kind of work that we do is a kind of a physical fitness practice, but it's not occurring at the speed of most physical fitness practices. When people think about getting physically fit, they think about going to the gym and sweating and lifting heavy weight, making a lot of effort, and that whole idea of putting in a lot of effort to get the change or to get the transformation that you want. Feldenkrais works at a very different layer, which is the movements are all slowed down, and we really work on kind of deconstructing how movements are actually created and then reconstructing them back together in a better way. So it's just a very different approach to how someone is going to use movement in their life and how they're going to actually refine and improve, which is what everybody wants to improve. It's just that the way they think about how they're going to do that can be very different. Some people think they're going to improve by just every day I got to get out there and I gotta burn. I gotta go real hard. And for some people, they have that kind of body where it's okay. But for a lot of people, that attitude can get them into trouble because of their age or their history. And so the culture tells us, you've got to just work hard and the effort will be rewarded with the improvement. And that's only half true. It is half true. But there is an occasional dark side to that where the person doesn't know how to modulate their effort. And they may not really have a practice that allows them to kind of assemble movement more clearly and more safely for themselves. And that kind of approach that's what I teach. And it's the kind of thing that really has a lot of consequences for how you age and the way you recover from injuries, the longevity of your health span, so to speak.
That's really interesting because nobody really knows how to heal from an injury. I think it's very rare to actually find somebody who's recovering well after something happened. But before that, so what creates the circumstances for somebody to injure themselves? So let's say athletes, for example, they build their body up. They have lots of training, different kind of ways that they challenge and train their body, right? But then they still injure themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there are different kinds of circumstances that contribute to the way that a person can get injured. And what you said is, I like what you said in that you were kind of talking from the first person perspective. As someone, I've been injured before. I think most the people that have never been injured, lucky them. We're not too worried about them. And
you got a trophy.
Yeah, of course. But I think most people, if you have a conversation with somebody who you just met over the table, if you ask the table, has anybody here been injured? Most people are going to say yes to that question. And most of us are very familiar with that experience of something that hurts, like you banged your shoulder against the car door by accident, and you're like, oh my God. And then you're just like, oh, and later that night you're changing for bed and you see there's a bruise there and you think, oh man, I gotta be more careful. And then you have this bruise and for a few days it's there and it kind of hurts and then it goes away. And you just think, great, my body is working, right? Apparently it heals itself. And it really does under certain circumstances when the conditions are right. The body can really take care of those kinds of injuries. The darker side of the continuum is when the injury is bigger or it's more intense or it's a little more dangerous, And most of us know what that experience is like, where not only does it feel bad for quite a while, but then we never really get back. Even if we get help from, you go to a doctor's, you go to physical therapy, you go to rehabilitation, all these kinds of things. You have the sense that, yes, it's better than it was a few days after the injury, but I still limp, or I still can't reach my arm all the way up, or the person is learning to live with these kind of new levels of deficit in their life.
Right. A lot of times you hear advice like just strengthen your muscle to stabilize the joint, or to right, in a way. But okay, it might help like 5% or 10%. Maybe sometimes it's enough, right? That's possible too for a person. But it didn't really address like building your muscle is probably not why you have that pain or that instability in that certain joint, right? Yeah.
I mean, it's very true that, like what you said, when you're injured, part of what is deranged a little bit is your ability to trust your body, especially when an injury that hangs on for a long time. I mean, I got into this. I got interested in Feldenkrais because of an injury I had to my right hand. I was a classical pianist in a former life, and when I arrived in New York City for school, I had, of course, been practicing very intensely in order to make the auditions. And I had basically created a terrible case of tendonitis in my right hand and my right arm. And at its worst was probably a period of maybe, I'd say about a year, when it was really bad. And there was a period of time where I couldn't really touch the piano with my right hand without pain, or if I played for 2 or 3 minutes, it would just spike, right? It would just become uncomfortable. And so I had to learn left-handed repertoire for only one hand, which was a very interesting experience.
Oh, that's like the baseball players that like put their arm in a cast on purpose to use the other hand. They didn't do it voluntarily.
Right. That's right. Mine was not a creative. It wasn't really a creative moment, but yeah, But the thing is that the injury that I had where the pain lasted for a year, it did get better, but then it nagged on for 10 years. Yeah. 10 years, really. And that's partially because of the way that what I did about it and what I didn't do about it. And this is like what you're talking about with what most people experience with these kinds of injuries that really, they hang on for a long time, is partly what is not healing is not the tissue. I mean, yes, you could say the tissues, the muscles, the tendons, etc., but it's the pattern of use. It's the way you're actually supporting your weight as you move the arm. It's the way you're putting weight on that ankle again and again. Those kinds of habitual patterns of use, they make it very hard for the tissues to heal fully. Because in a sense, you're not creating the conditions in which the muscles finally say, oh, I feel so much more supported now, and so now we can heal up. You're continuing to put micro strain, or sometimes not so micro. Sometimes you just continue to put strain on top of it. And part of what is very common for people is they simply get used to a certain kind of discomfort and pain and stiffness or tightness. They learn to live with it to an extent.
Right. And then they numb that out so they don't notice it consciously, right? So it's like...
That's right.
You still have all your pains and bad habits and like grinding down on the injury, but you don't notice it anymore.
That's right. You in a way, your brain is very wily. It's very smart. It's very it knows how to take something that's uncomfortable and take it out of the foreground and just move it into the background where you don't notice it as much. That's actually quite useful in some way. That's kind of functional. Like if you hit your arm in the car door, you've got this bruise, and the tissue wasn't really damaged. I mean, you got a bruise, but you didn't break it, or you didn't tear a ligament or whatever. If your response was just just all day long, you can't even get a cup of coffee, or you can't, continue to work. I mean, if your response was way out of proportion to the injury, that would be a whole other set of problems. So there's something in the nervous system that's quite functional in the way that it takes the difficulty and helps it to recede into the background so that we can continue to function at some level. The real problem, though, is that if you make that a habit, the injury doesn't really, it may feel like it's kind of receded a little bit, but very often it's not. It's like a tree that's just growing around this knot in the trunk. And it does have consequences for later. It has consequences in terms of what kinds of activities you start to be able to do or not be able to do anymore in your life. Like you might have been a runner who got a bad ankle injury or knee injury, and then 10 years later you don't really like to do any of that stuff anymore. You don't like to run. You swim. That you like to swim because the water is buoyant, or you like to do slow stretching on the floor or something like this. But anything ballistic where you're jumping and landing, or you might have liked to dance before, even just for fun, but you don't like to dance anymore because your knee just gives you this reminder every time you go on Friday night, you go to the club and you go to dance, and it's not worth it anymore. And so this is a very common experience.
And again, you don't really notice why you don't like it anymore.
Yes.
It's that black hole where everything
this is where it gets really interesting, because it goes into a black hole because you don't really know any different. This is where I think the Feldenkrais attitude towards injury and healing is actually quite practical. What you really need to do is you need to learn how to move your knee or how to support weight through your knee, and you don't need to learn it in 5 minutes. You probably need to spend some serious time devoting some serious attention to actually building something better than you had before. And this, of course, feels very inconvenient to people. Most people, we're very attached to convenience, to something being expedient. We like the experience of healing very quickly from the bang in the car door. And we're like, oh, thank God, I'm not gonna have to miss work. I'm not gonna have to go to the doctor. I just move it around and it gets a little better.
Yeah.
Who doesn't like that? It's like, whew, thank God.
Yeah.
It's mild and my body could handle it. The problem is when something more serious happens and you adopt the same attitude. You keep waiting for your body to be able to just handle it in the background, and your body just doesn't handle it, because at that level, you have to take a different kind of responsibility with yourself that is quite inconvenient, because you have to spend time teaching yourself or working with a teacher or some other, the person who can help you. You have to take the time to build something that has more integrity to it. And that can take time. You're trying to come back from an injury. There's a lot you don't understand. And this is one of the basic problems that people have when they're injured. They know what their experience feels like. They have a subjective experience of their own fear or their own, the painfulness of pain is a subjective experience. It's the same injury for you versus me. I might feel like it's just awful, and you're like, no, it's not that bad, right? But each of us has this interior experience of ourselves. But then the real question is, what are you going to do about it?
Nothing.
And this is what happens, is that we start to contract in on ourselves, and we just start to play defense, basically. Well, I'm not going to go to the dance tonight. I'll just see. Maybe I'll rub it a little bit. I'll put some arnica on it, or so. We have these little remedies that we try.
Yeah.
But we don't really seriously look at how we're moving, and we don't really have any kind of serious methodology to help us do that. Some of us, of course, will go to the doctor. They'll take x-rays and they'll tell you it's broken or it's not broken. You get an image, and that's really useful. And then you might go work with a physical therapist, and that's also very useful. A good physical therapist will save your career, save your life. The question is just, how many sessions are you getting with that physical therapist? Some people don't have much money, and they don't have very great insurance, and those decisions are not being made by you. You know, a company is telling you you get 7 physical therapy sessions. Well, I hope 7 is lucky, right? I hope 7 is lucky. I hope your relationship with the physical therapist is good. I hope the kinds of exercises or stretches they prescribe, I hope they work. Of course, we all want a good outcome. The question for the individual is, how's it going? How's it going? And most people, when you ask them, you know, again, my clients, the people that have come to see me over the last 2 decades, most of those people, when you ask them how it's going, it didn't go too great. In other words, the medical intervention, it didn't solve everything. And that's, again, the question I often ask clients is, so what did you learn in physical therapy? What do you now understand about how your knee works or how to support weight through your foot? I will ask them a little bit about what they learned. And it's very revealing, because some people will tell you they learned a lot. They know this, and it really helps me as a teacher understand what kind of a sponge this person might be for taking in information, how kinesthetically they are available to themselves, how much do they enjoy the process of learning about their body. Some people, when you ask them what they learned, it's 0. They're like, what I learned that my knee is garbage and I'm a mess, and that's a big message that they're sending you. They're sending you a message of, I have absolutely no hope for myself, and I want you to just fix it, or, you know, whatever the conversation, wherever it might go. But this is all to say that the process of getting better, of improving, it is a learning process. Right. And for most people, they also don't really know what that means. Learning, what the hell does that mean? You mean I'm going to have to sit in class with an anatomy textbook and I'm going to have to memorize the muscles? Is that the kind of learning we're talking about? Is it kind of
learning something like
over and over until the muscles get stronger? You know?
Knowing how to learn is a skill in itself. It is not something that most people know what it is. Like it's I had to learn that too. Like it's a journey.
Yeah, I mean, do you remember what it was like to be in school? I don't know what school in Italy is like compared to where I went to school in Maryland.
Most teachers were, let's call them, let's say mediocre. I had a few good ones, but even there was just a few single experiences that I can still draw from now. For example, in language learning, right? But compared to what I had to learn after school, to let's use the language learning example, to actually succeed or like learn the languages at a decent level, right? Mm-hmm. I had to add so much more. It was like 3-4 things that I got from them that were good over the course of my whole school career, right? And then a whole other chunk that was needed to properly move forward.
I mean, this in hindsight, looking back, that all makes perfect sense. When you're going through it, you're not necessarily thinking that way. Most people in school have a very passive understanding of what learning is, and they actually acquire that model of how learning works. How does learning work? Well, you tell me what to do, and then I'll do it. Yeah. Like that's probably not going to work too well, especially when you've been injured and your whole mechanism for how you perceive movement in your own body has been damaged or threatened or whatever. There's a phrase that I like that learning can't be taught. Learning can only be caught. Like, you throw a ball and somebody catches the ball.
That's interesting.
Yeah, you can't just sit there and the teacher just pours. They're in the old, I guess maybe it's in the Greek and Roman, writings. There are really 2 models of learning that are put forward. One model has the student as a kind of an empty vessel, just an empty jar, and the teacher, of course, pours the knowledge into the student, and it just it accumulates like the way water would rise in the jar. And that doesn't really work too well. because while there are people that can learn like that, they have to be very lucky. You just have to hit the genetic lottery to just be able to hear a lecture and take in the information and then apply it to yourself somehow, The other model of learning is that the teacher lays down a kind of a string on the floor, and the students learn how to follow the path of the string, and the students have to really follow all the curves, and the teacher just keeps laying out the string more and more. And this is really, to me, this is kind of the phrase that I often use with my students and in my workshops and classes is there's a real difference between passive literacy and active literacy. Like,
explain that, please.
Well,
that's a big one.
Yeah. So, for instance, passive literacy with regards to reading and writing, right? Books, literature. So I can read the newspaper, and I can tell you what went on today, and Warnock won the Georgia election for Senate, and I can get all this information, and I can read. I know how the coding works, and I know it's left to right, and then you go to the next line. I know what words look like, and I have this vocabulary, and I can just take information as it's coming into me. That's what I would call passive literacy. Somebody else has written the article, and it's coming in. And I can function like that. Most people, that's how they function their whole lives, is just by reading and taking in information. But writing something, writing a letter to somebody, or writing a book or an article, that is a completely different order of skill. That takes way more active understanding of how sentences are built and how one sentence relates to another and how an argument is maybe constructed or how an image is fulfilled through the sentences and that's just a very different level of skill. It's and music is no different. Of course, you go to a concert and the concert is full of musicians on the stage and people in the audience. And the people in the audience may not play music at all. They don't play any instruments. But they love music, and that's what they're there for. They're there because it provides an amazing experience, and it just comes to you from the orchestra or the singers, and it's beautiful. And those people should have those beautiful experiences. But being able to play music, to actually make music yourself, that's a different order of skill than just hearing and enjoying music. And that requires practice, is what that requires. And that requires a real relationship with practice. And what you find when people have had injuries or some deficits or whatever to their health or their function, one thing that is definitely revealed by that is their relationship to practice. Because usually what's required for you to go from functioning here, where you're limping and you're in pain every morning, and it's been that way for 2 years or 3 months or whatever it is, to go from this to being able to walk so that you just feel like you did when you were 18 before the injury or, whatever it is, that is going to require some attention. That's going to require some work. It's a project, actually. And most people, when they hear that, are like,
looking at somebody walk beautifully, let's say. Yeah. And walking well yourself.
Well, if you and I were sitting on a park bench in Central Park in New York City, and we were watching all the people walk by, I'm sure that without any training whatsoever, you could look out and see, look at this guy. He looks like he might have had a back injury at some point in his life. I mean, I wouldn't expect you to give some sort of detailed analysis, but you're going to have some impression of this guy walking, and you're going to be like, something is off. And then somebody else is going to walk by, and you're like, that's healthy. He looks fit. He looks symmetrical in the way he's walking. He doesn't look like he's limping on either hip. And you don't need a lot of specialized training to see that. It's just visually apparent. But you're right. What about for yourself, though? When you're the one that's injured, how are you going to apply? What is that level of understanding? Is that going to be enough that you just go, oh, well, I guess I shouldn't limp. Okay, I'll just try not to limp. It doesn't work well.
Imagine if it was that easy.
Yeah, you need a kind of a reworking of the software, and the software is really how you pay attention to the way you move, and to learn that there are actually choices that you make when you move. And most people don't really have this experience of themselves unless they get injured and they're really forced to understand it. they don't understand that a lot of their movement habits are simply choices that they make over and over unconsciously. But they don't know how to enter the space where you can see what the choices are, you can slow the process down, and you can learn to identify different nuances. That's a lot of what learning is, right? Is going from making these unconscious choices to being able to compare using your senses and your kinesthetic abilities, and then being able to then choose something that's more efficient. It's sometimes it's quite simple. Other times it takes a long time. It depends on the kind of injury. It depends on the kind of person. It depends on the kind of teacher. All those things. The challenge is, of course, to make that kind of learning fun, to make it pleasurable, to make it safe, to make it gradual enough so you don't feel rushed in the process of trying to rebuild something that's maybe been broken down a little bit, or maybe a lot. That learning how to learn really becomes important there, because the process of learning, it can't be something you're just forcing with willpower. You don't know what the situation needs. So being gentle and circumspect and methodical is much more to your advantage at that point. And of course, you need to work with somebody that knows what they're doing too, of course.
Right, because you yourself don't know. So are there injuries or circumstances where it is, let's say, too severe for Feldenkrais to work, or just it's not the right thing, just because it's a different thing that's necessary?
Definitely. I mean, in my opinion, yes, there are certainly injuries that are too acute or drastic where you need medical help, right? You know, if you've torn the bicep tendon completely. I've had this. A client who came in and had torn the bicep tendon, like not a little bit, but literally severed it playing tennis. God. And was told by her doctor that she would be fine. She was too old to have the surgery. And it just, to me, the situation just smacked of somebody really trying to paper over a very difficult moment. And I just thought, you need a second opinion. You need to go back either to that doctor or to another one. Like, that's where my own scope of practice, my understanding of what am I good for and what is outside of my skill level. That's a very important thing, to be able to refer someone, because people sometimes they don't know what they need. And my job is not to tell them, oh yes, my thing will definitely help you. You want to orient them properly in reality. So there are definitely situations where a Feldenkrais practitioner is not the proper person to go see. But there is quite a wide range of things. If the person is fairly independent and can pay attention and can move, and the movement is not somehow threatening their life or something like this, the method is so gentle and patient in the way that it's often applied that it can be useful. And I mean, another phrase that's interesting, it's for any kind of person, but it might not be for any kind of personality, right? Like of course there are.
Which ones are not good?
I just speak from experience. It's, that if somebody comes to see a class, they come to watch a group class, they don't know what Feldenkrais is. And if they watch, it's okay for people to watch. I mean, usually the teacher will want to encourage them, just come do the class so you have an actual experience of it. Mm-hmm. But some people will look at it and they'll think, well, these people they're not doing very much. It doesn't look like anything I've seen before. It doesn't look like a yoga class. Although they're in this position, they're kind of, they're making this sliding movement of the arm over the floor, but they don't have a cultural reference point for it. Or is it's kind of slow like Tai Chi, huh? Or, well, it's not they're not burning any calories, so how can it do any good? In other words, each person is, of course, coming in with a bunch of opinions about right. And there has to be a certain kind of openness. The person has to be curious enough that they're willing to participate and to sort of to be taught or be willing to learn for themselves. That's kind of that's kind of necessary. You can't, you talk to anybody who was told they had to take piano lessons, and they were not really interested in playing piano, but their parents were like, no, it's a good idea for you. That doesn't go too well, right?
No.
They have to have some innate curiosity, or they have to see some.
Right.
Yeah.
Because if not, it's just gonna be a lot of fighting with yourself.
Yeah, and people, the instructional scene, the act of being with a teacher and learning from a teacher, that's a relationship, hopefully. And if it goes really well, if you're helping somebody, with their pain or the way their back is functioning or their left hip is just not supporting them well and they don't know why, and you need a good relationship between the practitioner and the client, or the teacher and the student, however you want to call it, because it's not as if the teacher can just magically apply this technique and then you just, the bruise is gone. Hey, thanks very much. Like, it can work like that occasionally, but for a lot of people, it's not going to work like that. It's going to take a little bit longer than they think, and they're actually going to have to participate. They're going to have to learn how to pay attention to their experience as they go through the lessons. And it's really useful to the learning process for the client to engage, to feel like, oh, last lesson we did this thing with my foot, and it really had this great effect on my neck all week. I could just feel my foot standing more solidly under the side of my neck. And that's a person that's starting to reflect on their experience and is actually using their experience in order to improve. That, to me, is a very positive sign. It means the person is actually able to pay attention and to carry the thread forward from one lesson to the next. It's not like, I don't expect them to remember everything about what goes on. That's partly what I'm there for, is to also help that process too. But if somebody comes back and the next week they're like, okay, what are we doing this week? Are you just going to, okay, whatever. And they lie down on the table and they go to sleep. This is not a healthy, that person is not learning how to learn, or they're not learning to use their attention in a useful way. And so it's a delicate kind of a dance, really. And, a person, a lot of people don't have an experience of that kind of relationship building experience with a teacher or with a practitioner of some kind. A lot of people will go into certain experiences with, if they've had a massage or they've been to a physical therapist. They're, of course, fantastic massage therapists and physical therapists. But the question has there been a kind of a relationship in terms of the way that they're learning together? That's, I think, an important thing to consider. Most people know how to go in and have a massage, and it feels great. But they may not be learning how to attend to themselves in the interaction of the session. I don't know, there are probably different kinds of massage therapists out there. But that it's like if you were going for music lessons. A really bad music lesson would just be the teacher saying, no, this finger over there. No, and just correcting you over and over again. And it would feel like, well, I guess I'm learning how to play the flute because she's telling me that this finger goes here. But it's not really that fun. Whereas a good relationship is teaching the student also how to listen to themselves. And that's not an easy thing to teach all the time. But if you're going to get better at music, boy, you're going to have to learn the skill of listening. And it's an active skill. It's not turn on the radio and music pours out and, hey, I'm listening to the music. That's one level. It's very different when you want to learn how to play that song that's on the radio.
Right, because at the end of the day, you have to do it yourself. Because you're the one playing, you're the one moving, you're the one, doing what you're doing.
Most people, that's what they want. And most people will actually say that that's what they want. They'll say it in terms of, they'll want to know how many sessions until they're going to get better. That's a common kind of question. But most people are looking for this horizon of independence where they're in control, which I think is a great thing to look forward to. The question is just, how are we going to navigate there? And how clear do you want to feel in control? Different people, a professional athlete is going to have a high degree of interest often in just how clear they feel with the control they have over the support in their hip or their knee or whatever, the way they're rotating around their leg to jump. They've spent hundreds, thousands of hours learning how to do that, and they know what it feels like when it goes really well. They may not understand it perfectly, but they know what it feels like when it feels efficient. They don't miss that experience. When that happens, they're like, yes, right? But they also want to understand how to produce it again and again, so they know it's more reliable. They're also very familiar with what it feels like when it doesn't go so well. And this is, again, with musicians or performing artists or athletes, they have a lot of experience with mistakes.
Right.
But it's really open to question is what do they do in the experience of the mistake? Do they shame themselves? Do they kind of like wall themselves off from it and let's just do it again until we get it? Are they very kind of militaristic in their approach? And so, your personality is really involved in the learning process, And that's one of the things that I think is huge for people that are trying to heal from injuries, is developing a healthy relationship to practice. Yeah. You want to be able to spend 20 minutes by yourself walking down the street and attending to the quality of support through your knee and starting to really know how to orient yourself better at the end of the block than you did at the beginning of the block. That's a good performance metric for a person, even though it seems very, just walking down the street. But it should be something that you're capable of doing after a period of time,
Yes. So, what are some, can you give a few examples of, maybe things that people come with to you? So, right, it doesn't really have to be an injury, but, when is it a good idea to come to a Feldenkrais practitioner?
Well, there are a lot of different reasons that people come. Most of them are built around their relative comfort or skill in movement. So a lot of people do come because they're having pain.
Right.
And it tends to be the kind of pain that's nagged them for a long time. They've already had many interventions. I don't think Feldenkrais is so popular or so, in people's minds enough that that's the first phone call they're making. Like, oh, my shoulder hurts. I think I'm calling this Feldenkrais teacher. They've probably been to other medical interventions first. But so pain and discomfort, musculoskeletal pain, that kind of thing is quite common for the reasons that people come.
Can be everywhere, anywhere in the body, right?
I guess. I mean, there are different practitioners that sort of maybe have more experience working with certain kinds of pain. Like, if you're coming because your jaw is the issue, you probably want to work with a practitioner that has had experience helping people work with their jaws. Or, if a person has had, I've had clients who've had Harrington rods, surgically rods in their spine, right? They use steel rods.
Okay.
Spine. And I certainly remember the first time that I worked with somebody who'd had that. I had never worked with anybody like that before. And I was very cautious, and I made sure that there was a lot of communication. I really wanted to hear from them their experience of what it's been like because they've been with lots of different doctors and physical therapists, and what was useful and what was not. There was quite a long interview process with this person, so that I really learned where would be the boundaries. I don't want it to just be like some open, do whatever you want. This person's having major surgical intervention. And so it's very important to understand clearly where can the improvements be made, and also what's important to them. A person in those conditions, their spine is not going to turn very much in the way. It's not going to improve that much because there's been a mechanical intervention. So then the question becomes, given that, well, where is the place where they could actually get more improvement? How can they use their hip joints a little more for rotation? Because they're not going to be able to turn the spine with the same kind of facility that somebody who hadn't had that surgery before. So that kind of experience and knowledge is very important. Then, of course, you have people coming who, musicians or dancers or things like this. And I don't play violin, but I've worked with many, many violinists and violists and cellists and a few bass players and a few drummers. And while I may not need to know perfectly how to play those instruments, my understanding of music in general, and having been around other musicians and being somewhat familiar with the way a drummer has to sit and play on the kit, or the way the flute player is going to be like this all the time, that knowledge is really useful. And it's also, in conversation, it can be quite soothing to the musician, because they understand that they're talking to someone who isn't just some sort of body mechanic. You know, the complaints that you get from musicians who have been to doctors, and I'm not poo-pooing doctors, you need a good doctor, but often the doctor doesn't understand what the violinist is doing in the practice room all the time. And so their shoulder is bothering them. And the doctor's level of understanding as to what do they do with that arm all day long, you know, it depends. Is the doctor familiar with that? Maybe the doctor has worked with a lot of violinists and so really does understand the situation. But that sort of rapport between the teacher and the student, it's very psychologically important, because the student can then relax and sort of engage. They're not just playing defense against, does this person, you know, what's this technique they think is going to fix my arm or my neck issue or whatever it is.
Right. You actually have to be like, what's it called? Like relaxed enough to pay attention, right? If you're just in fight flight and you're not sure, oh, is this person understanding me? Does he even know what is going on, right? You're just like, it's this anxiousness, or like can be other things too, but you're not really able to pay attention to what's like to move forward.
That's right. And that's also an issue, is that anxiousness or that anxiety or whatever it is, that will interfere with every good intention or every sensitivity or brilliance or technical competence that the practitioner may bring to a situation. You really have to work with the person who's in the room with you. That's very important. You have to learn about that person. It's very important to have compassion and to create a space where it's okay for them to be in the room with you. You know, when I take my car to the garage, if my car is having trouble, I of course need to know, is this mechanic good or is he not so good? You know, and you ask your neighbors and you say, oh, is he good? And they say, oh yeah, he's really good. He fixed my, and you go on very limited information and hopefully he fixes the car. But I don't, I'm not like looking for some deep quality of trust. You know, it's not some long interview process with them. It's pretty transactional, right? Well, in a Feldenkrais lesson or in this kind of thing, you know, I'm going to be touching the person. Touch is a very intimate thing, even if you're just touching the elbow or, you know, the foot or whatever. Touch is a situation that has enormous potential, but it has potential to be difficult for the person to experience too. People want to know, you know, why are you touching my foot if my knee is really the thing that's causing me that? Why aren't you working directly on the place that's... And so maybe there has to be some conversation or explanation about how the foot relates to the knee. And you have to create, again, a kind of a safety, a kind of a rapport between you. Because in the beginning, you don't know each other.
Right.
The tendency is to assume, oh, you're a client coming for a session. I'm a teacher who does this for a living. I guess everything's great. Come on in. Let's begin. This will just go great. You know, time will teach you that assumption is not... It's not the best assumption to make. That's just maybe a desire for you to feel comfortable all the time at work. But of course, each person is different, and they're bringing different histories into the room with them. You know, I've worked with musicians who have spent thousands of hours developing unbelievable levels of skill. And then the thing you realize is that their relationship with their teacher, their music teacher, is very difficult. Right, and that. It doesn't mean I'm a psychotherapist. It doesn't mean I know what to do right then and there. It just means that's a useful piece of information. That the whole conversation around music or how they were taught music, that might be very fraught for them. It might be a difficult conversation. and it might, even though you're working with how they're moving the bow or how their arm makes these kinds of movements and whether their clavicle actually can move when they make, all these kinds of mechanical details, there's more than that in the room. There's a living, breathing person that doesn't just make these movements, but it has a whole history of maybe striving to achieve something that's very, very difficult, or a history of great frustration with the people around them. It's maybe not everybody is like this, but those are important things to know about the person that you're working with. And that's the kind of detail where, as you're building a relationship together and you're working in sessions over a period of time, that, of course, is very important to build trust in the experience. If it's going to go well, you really want the person who's coming, the client or the student, you want them to not only begin to trust the experience with the teacher, you want them to begin to be able to trust themselves, right? It's not just the teacher is pouring the knowledge right into the student. They're just filling up like a can. That you're wanting them to be able to drive the experience of the sessions more and more, to have agency, to have autonomy, to make new decisions for themselves, and to be okay with the progress. Sometimes the progress goes, and then sometimes it goes, and then sometimes they had a bad week. And to help them understand that, yes, you had a bad week, it may not mean that everything is going badly. You also have to learn how to get out of a bad week before. And they probably have all kinds of habits and histories for how they dealt with bad weeks before.
Right.
All of that becomes part of the mix. There's only so much you can do in a single hour session, and of course everybody's a little different. Some people are coming more frequently and whatnot. But in that sense, they're trying to take a little more possession of their lives and to make their experience of their bodies something useful. Even the negative things, even the experience of pain, can be made more useful if you're oriented in the right way, right? Just to see pain as an indication of a kind of a guardrail, and then also to see that, well, what are the other choices that modulate that discomfort? I didn't realize that if I just had a little more contact with my big toe and my second toe on the floor. I didn't realize I was just lifting those. I'm always just lifting those toes off the floor. 3 hours of rehearsal every day, and I just sit there with the toes like this. This seems like a ridiculous little detail.
Yeah.
These are kinds of things.
Oh, I get it. Oh, God.
Yeah.
And then you wonder, why is my back hurting?
Right, because it's all relational.
Like off? It's more to the right, or to the left.
Why is it that every jump I do? Right, why is it every jump I do is always off the left leg? Huh? Why can't I ever go off my right leg? Is it just the left leg is harder? Is it because the left leg is the inside of the turn, or the right leg is the? Are those the? Is it something about the way I turn my pelvis? Like, there's a lot to consider. And the other thing that's really true about athletes and certainly about just anyone that's experienced an injury is you may have had a lot of training. You may have spent thousands of hours and thousands of dollars, learning to play your instrument or to skate or to ski or whatever it is. But part of the difficulty of the situation that you're really there to confront, actually, is to learn that your training didn't include everything.
Right.
There is no such thing as some sort of perfectly comprehensive training. The violinist is somehow learning also how to stand really well. Well, some stand very well. Naturally, they just tend towards a better quality of posture. There's some that their teachers have talked to them about it for years, and they still never really do it. Some have had teachers that never mentioned how they stand at all. And to unpack this with the person, it's a real privilege in a way, but it's also quite inconvenient. It always feels like, oh, great, we're going to have to go back into the past and rebuild a different kind of foundation. Yes, that is exactly what you're going to have to do. And if you can just learn to embrace it and learn to enjoy it, what you'll get is something better than you had before. And that's kind of a big promise, but with the right kind of relationship, the right kind of person, and you really can go from an injury or a kind of a function in the arm that's not so pleasant to actually functioning better than before it was injured. That's not true in every case. I'm not making some sort of crazy blanket statement. Obviously, there are certain kinds of injuries where it's never going to work the same way. But you want to discover, you want to find out for yourself, well, how much can I improve it?
Right.
How much really
that's a good challenge.
how much is in our window of opportunity here? Because man, what I'd like this. Now, if you're telling me I can only get this, okay, but let's find out. Let's find out what it feels like once you're there. Yeah. So it's a lot about helping a person understand what their options are in life and how to go about getting those results. And hopefully it's just a way of getting there that isn't destroying you in the process of trying to heal you, right? And this is another whole another direction of conversation, which is a lot of people who are coming also are not performing artists, and they're just people getting older, and they're trying to stay fit, or they're trying to work out, and of course as they're getting older their bodies are getting a little worse. And then there's this really interesting kind of balance, because when they go for a run, is the run really keeping them cardiovascularly fit? It's helping their heart, keep strong, but is the way they're running also breaking down their hip or their knee or their ankle? And this it's a difficult conversation, because we want to keep active, but we also have to address that the way you're moving, you have to understand it well enough and be embodied well enough that you're actually in control of what you're doing, so you're not going past the point where what you're doing is actually harming you, right? You can go on YouTube and look at, there's a million videos of people lifting weights to get stronger, and there's the injury, right? You see the guy trying to lift too much weight and he pops a tendon or something like this. Most people's injuries aren't that severe, but the conditions, the sort of the cultural drives, just I've got to do this, and it doesn't matter how it feels. I've got to do this to get stronger.
Push through, yeah.
This is, of course, part of the problem. It's their relationship to effort, right? Which is often a very poisoned relationship. I mean, effort is not a bad thing. I think effort is great. I love making a good effort. I lift weights with a strength coach, and I don't know that I enjoy it. Like, yay! I get, but I know why I'm doing it, and I try to take care of the safety of the situation. But for a lot of people, their relationship to effort is very poisoned. It could be poisoned by past injuries, and they get to a place where they can't make any effort, and they're just always in pain, and it's like the harder they try, the worse it gets, and they don't know how to solve that puzzle of how am I going to learn to move in a way that's actually pleasant again. And they're somehow addicted to this idea that it's just a willpower conversation. And the Feldenkrais method is trying to tell you something, that willpower, there's a use for willpower in the world. There really is. But it's usually only for emergencies. And if you're trying to live all the time with a kind of an emergency mindset, the fight or flight problems with people that have trauma or anxiety or these kinds of things, it's the same kind of conversation, where if every time you're going down to get dishes from the dishwasher, and the way you squat is as if you're compressing into yourself as if to protect yourself from getting hit, or you just have a very disorganized way of doing it, it's going to create problems. You're not living beyond physics. Gravity is just always doing its job. It's always pulling you down, and your muscles are not that smart. Your muscles are just they're gonna perform under the circumstances that you provide. And the question is, do you want to know what those circumstances are and how to actually alter them so that the muscles, they'll just behave differently when you know how to alter the circumstances,
Yes,
So,
and they can learn that with you.
they absolutely can. That's
One
the whole
option.
thing that I do. It is one option. Yeah. That's what I've tried to do over 2 decades. And now that I've been teaching online, and I created this online subscription course. The thing I noticed with clients over the years was that the people that really do improve, that really do get what they want, they really engage with the material and they develop a healthy relationship with practice. You know, a person that goes from like, oh, this is a pain, I don't know, the shoulder's been bothering me, it's such a pain to have to do these exercises or whatever, it's fine. It's fine for that attitude to be at the beginning. But to see a person go from that to like actually discovering how their body works for the first time and actually really having a different model, a different way of actually embodying themselves in the world, that's a really exciting thing because you see the person actually change. They become different. And they actually learn how to control their own situation better. You know?
I'm really interested in that topic too.
Yeah.
But I think it's gonna be another half-hour talk. So
okay. Well, I tell you what. Let's not talk about it, but ask me the question that you're thinking of asking me now, and we'll save it for later.
It's gonna be too much.
Okay.
Trust me. We'll save it for another episode.
Cool. Just make sure you write it down somewhere today.
Yeah. I'm gonna... So, to close this off, how can people work with you or get in contact with your work and what you do?
My website is bodyofknowledge.me. And right now the online course that I run is hosted on Patreon, which is one of these subscription services, but it's going to be moving shortly. I'm moving it to a different platform. And there's a whole online community portion with it. And so there's workshops there. There's a video course on computer posture that I'm releasing shortly. And then there'll be a live cohort course that I start to run next year. So I'll make announcements, and those people that want to come, it'd be fantastic to meet them.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on again.
Thank you, Leah. It's been really nice talking with you.